train arriving in Vienna is now a symbol of how Poland's rulers have turned the clock back years. Every morning, the Chopin Express arrives from Warsaw, but since martial law, there's been only a few authorized passengers and just one unauthorized refugee. Henry Kowalski is a Solidarity activist from Warsaw. Determined to get out, he hid for 3 days in a tiny space in the train's ceiling and is now suffering from jaundice caught from drinking the train's water supply.
Well, I simply did not feel like going to work. I imagined that every moment something unexpected would happen, something I couldn't foresee. I would be powerless in the hands of officials who controlled people. It was something evil.
Kowalski has now joined the thousands of Polish refugees housed in government camps in Austria. These people left Poland last year because they came to believe that Solidarity simply didn't have a chance. It's little consolation in a grim, crowded refugee camp to know that they were right. The eyewitnesses are Zdzisław Rurej, the Polish ambassador who defected in Japan, Leon Dubicki, a former general in the Polish armed forces, Jerzy Moll, the most senior Solidarity leader in the West, and Magda Wojcik, one-time personal secretary to Lech Wałęsa. We met Magda Wojcik in Rome, where she had an audience with the Pope and heard him speak out strongly in favor of Solidarity. She began working for the union in Lech Wałęsa's office and went on to found the international section, leaving Poland on a mission to raise food aid just before the crackdown. I asked her about her impressions of Lech Wałęsa in the first heady days of Solidarity.
He was a very demanding person. First of all, he demanded a lot of himself, and in the beginning I remember that he wanted to do everything by himself, which was of course impossible. We were very much aware of the limitations, but we still thought that, well, within those limits we could make a better Poland, to say it simply. And Wałęsa was certainly optimistic. I think he was, he realized what the problems were, but I think he was optimistic.
A few weeks later, Solidarity succeeded in publishing what they said were secret party instructions on how government officials were to handle the Free Trades Union. They had been drawn up while the Soviet tanks were at the borders of Poland.
Isolate Solidarity. If talks with them must take place, play for time. Create difficulties in food supplies, wear the nation out and put the blame on Solidarity. Extra funds for the secret police and a list of people to be interned.
General Leon Dubicki has known Jaruzelski since the Polish Communist Army was formed in Russia in World War II. Now retired, he defected last year.
I've known General Jaruzelski for more than 35 years. We served together in the Polish People's Army. We've met privately many times. 10 days before he became Prime Minister, I met him in his private villa outside Warsaw. He stressed that on no account would he give up power. He said that he would carry out the plans of the Warsaw Pact High Command. He added that the purpose of becoming Prime Minister was to have both civilian and military control, while carrying out plans to restore order in Poland. They compiled detailed lists of those officers who were regarded as suitable for this kind of operation. Anyone who expressed doubts or was suspect was simply transferred to other units, discharged from the army for reasons like ill health, or given barrack duties. At the same time, political education was stepped up in the army. To put it crudely, they mounted brainwashing operations. He emphasized the need to eliminate all kinds of opposition from the Polish social and political scene, since it could become hostile to the Soviet armed forces. He was especially concerned about this, because in the event of a confrontation with the West, the Soviet armies needed safe lines of communication through Poland, an absolutely secure corridor.
Kulikov was simply spelling out the basis of Soviet military thinking since 1945. In the event of East-West confrontation, massive Soviet reinforcements will pour through the so-called Polish corridor.
I have heard about that term used by Kulikov when I came to Warsaw, and I think that this was that. And by the way, even Jaruzelski repeated the same thing last January before the parliament, that nothing will be changed. What is the result of the last war? What is exactly that Poland is playing the role of the corridor for the Soviet army.
How was this expressed to you in the conversations you had with Polish and Soviet officials? this idea of Poland as a corridor?
Well, so that there was some, let's say, hopelessness on the side of the Poles, that whatever we would be doing, probably sooner or later that hour of truth would sound.
In Washington, the ambassador who defected because of martial law is now under the protection of the State Department. Zdzisław Ruraj was well placed to feel the remorseless Soviet pressure on his country, for as well as ambassador, he was also a colonel in military intelligence.
Sorry it's such a rainy day.
Oh, but it's
Sun shining in our hearts.
Ruraj was in Warsaw when Solidarity began and learnt at once what the Soviets felt.
I learned from very reliable sources, very top sources, that the Soviets quite simply rejected the idea of having Solidarity as Solidarity wanted. They were ready to approve Solidarity under the condition that Solidarity would surrender, I must say, to the party control and so on. But it was clear to me from the very beginning, and this I was basing on the information I received from these sources, that the main trouble would be with Moscow.
You were suggesting that right at the very beginning, from the very outset, the Russians sent a clear, unmistakable message.
Yes, yes.
That
Because
Solidarity
Poland
itself was
strategically is
unacceptable.
that much important for the USSR that they would not tolerate anything what is not of their making. So that since Solidarity was definitely a movement which was not controlled by the USSR, and which probably was even not offering the chance of being controlled, therefore they were pressing the regime to do away with Solidarity as soon as possible. And the regime from the very beginning adopted the tactics, the strategies which were clearly heading toward that objective.
In the Poland of Solidarity, where newspapers suddenly became worth reading and strikes were a normal part of life, one thing did not change. The security police, or SB, did not disappear. Instead, they reorganized and grew stronger.
All the possible information about the Solidarity activities, about the meetings, about the participants in the meetings, and not only in Solidarity, but in some other democratic organizations. And they were even, I must say, quite concerned about the party meetings. Several party meetings, especially those at the universities and in other places which had the reputation of being dissident, were very much, I must say, stuffed with security agents who were reporting what is going on.
One Solidarity leader who experienced from the start the government's determination to hang on to power is Jerzy Moll. Leader of the Free Trades Union in Krakow.
At the beginning of September 1980, I began to organize a Solidarity branch at the plant where I worked at Krakow. And I started to publicly expose the corruption of various government ministers and local plant directors. As soon as I did that, I became the object of a campaign of harassment. I was called an anti-socialist element. And I began to get phone calls saying that unless I stopped working for Solidarity, I would have a fatal car accident. I'd be murdered. Quite simply, an official of the security services came round. He demanded to be shown a list of all the people who were active members of Solidarity. That information was easy to get, as some names were registered and others could be got from the payroll lists which showed which people were paying union dues. From March onwards, we noticed that the security services were methodically collecting information about us.
People had it very much against him, people were inside the National Commission. But I know that he was convinced, and then that's what he said, that if no compromise was reached and if the people went on general strike as was expected on Tuesday, then that there would be war.
In his embassy in Tokyo, Ambassador Ruraj saw evidence of how the government already had a plan for martial law. Wałęsa had dragged the union back from the brink.
I think it was either March 27 or 28. In early morning hours, I was awakened by my court clerk, who brought me the urgent message, cable from Warsaw, announcing that in case the general strike materializes, the state of war would be declared in Poland, and that I should proceed with certain precautionary measures. I myself was concerned about the lack of interest of the government in improving the market situation, and I proposed once that maybe we should be seeking rice purchases in Japan. There was no reaction. Then I myself, without having any instruction, raised this problem with the Japanese government, and then I asked them for 20,000 tons only. And after some time, they agreed. Of course, I cabled this to Warsaw that it was the Japanese government who proposed us that.
Several times, Rurej telexed Warsaw, asking for permission to buy the rice. Finally, he got the go-ahead, but with an important condition.
They were specifically saying that the first shipments should be leaving Japan not sooner than in December. And actually the ship Fenian, who came to Japan for the first shipment of rice, actually called on the Japanese port early in December. So that this also leads me to believe that maybe this was planned to be delivered after the crackdown, but not before. And the Japanese could have delivered us that rice well before.
When Rakowski came to the plant, he seemed to be suffering from some kind of nervous tension, and it was clear that there was no way of reaching an understanding with him. In fact, he told us that as a communist, he would hang on to power with his fingernails if necessary, even if that meant bloodshed. He said he would spill blood, but he wouldn't hand over power.
According to a Solidarity report at the time, he said that General Jaruzelski would take over as the head of a Committee of National Salvation. Special units of the army and militia had the task of suppressing resistance. Looking back, Ambassador Rurej has no doubt that this was the moment when Jaruzelski surrendered to Soviet pressure.
I must say that I can't understand why the West is presenting him as a patriot and a nationalist. As a matter of fact, he did the greatest disservice to the Polish nation. He declared the war for the first time on the Polish nation by the Polish general, so that this never was in our history like that.
The officers and NCOs are totally dependent on the army. If one of them gets a dishonorable discharge, it automatically condemns him and his family to a wretched and hungry existence. Most of the officers who might have been opposed to this kind of operation didn't dare to show their true feelings. They carried out their orders ruthlessly and to the letter to safeguard the standard of living of their wives and children.
In a factory meeting in Krakow, Jerzy Moll urged his colleagues to take precautions, but they were already helpless.
At one meeting, I suggested that we should prepare ourselves in case the government was planning something. It was clear that our leadership would immediately be arrested on the first day of a clampdown. So I suggested that we should create a new, secret leadership who would be able to avoid arrest and maybe organize strike action. 60 of our most trusted people heard me say this. The next day, an officer from the security service came to see me at work. He said, "What's all this about? Are you back to your old tricks of creating an underground movement?"
Away in Tokyo, Ambassador Rurej got a message through private channels warning him of what was about to happen.
The message was saying that now the situation comes to the point that the crackdown is almost 100% certain, and that that winter would be that date for the crackdown, and of course depending on the severity of the weather, that people were already quite tired with this, let's say, food lines, and then the weather would do the rest, and then probably the crackdown could count for a success.
There were rumors that the military are on the move, and even during the last session of the coordinating commission, nobody really believed. They had the information that the communication lines were cut off, but still they said, well, it must be, there must be something strange, but they didn't think that this was it. They thought that they were strong enough, that they had 10 million people behind them, that there's a strong organization, and they really believed that they could achieve it in negotiations.
So strong they couldn't be crushed?
Yes.
How do you feel about that now when you think about that confidence that existed before December 13th?
It's very bitter to think about that, because we should have been prepared.